Hi guys and welcome on my channel. My name is Marie and today I'm gonna tell you some bookish anecdotes about me and me and books in general. It's not the kind of content that I usually make, but I just thought it would be like pretty fun to share some stuff with you guys. I might be oversharing, but I like, you know, why not? So I'm gonna tell you a bit more about how I got into reading books and stuff like that, and like what genres I like and how I discovered myself through books. I just thought it would be a pretty fun video to make, so let's find out if I was right. So, ever since I can remember, I have always loved reading. However, I wasn't off to a very good start because when I was 6 years old and learning how to read, I just couldn't do it. I didn't understand the workings of the alphabet and how if you put like two letters together it would make a whole new sound. And I learned in French because it is my mother tongue, you know, so French is a very hard language to learn. Like, I realize that now that I speak 3 more languages, and French is a pain in the ass. And when I was 6 years old, I hated reading. I didn't like doing it because I didn't know how to, you know, and I didn't like doing things that I had to think about too hard because it made me feel dumb. I felt like I was so scared that I was gonna be illiterate for my whole entire life and that I was never going to be able to know how to read. I was so scared of that. And I remember we had homework to do. We had like this little box of words that we had to bring home and we had to read. We had to practice reading on the words at home. So my mom was doing that with me because my dad was just like, he was not patient enough. Couldn't blame him though, because it was the hardest thing I had ever had to do. And I was just like struggling on my words and I hated it. And I said to my mom, I was like, Mom, I can't read and I don't want to do this anymore. I like, there's no use, it's pointless, I don't know how to read and I don't want to do it. And I was just kind of like having a breakdown, you know how kids are. And first off, it was homework and I don't like doing homework, and it was also really hard for me, so one more reason to just like not do it, you know. And my mom closed the box and she said to me, she was like, well, you're right, you can't read, so let's just do this another way. And I don't remember how I worked past it. I just know that one day I was struggling and scared, like out of my mind, that I was gonna be that dumb kid of the family that doesn't know how to read. And the next day I found that I was not so bad at it, you know. And I think that's why I like reading so much. It's because I found out that I was like, not only could I do it, but I was also pretty good at it for like a 6-year-old kid. Once I understood the workings of it, there was like no stopping me. I struggled a lot with school as a kid. I was like really hard on myself, and for the most part I really thought that I was retarded, you know. So I was so relieved to know how to read and that I was not gonna be that dumb kid that never learned how to read, that I just like picked books out of fear that I would ever forget how to read. And then I just like started liking it more and more, you know. So that is, I think, how I got into reading books. It started out of fear and it grew into my favorite hobby. Once I was like 8 or 9 years old, my dad and I would go book shopping. I say my dad and I, but maybe my mom and brothers were there too, but I don't remember that. I just remember that my dad was looking for books of his own and I was in my own book section, you know, children's book or like whatever book I could find on the tables that I thought would be cool. I would pick them up and try to convince my dad to buy those books to me. And I was drawn to the most pretty books. I really liked pretty covers, and for like most of the time those books were the most expensive books because the prettier they are, the pricier they get, you know. And there is one book in particular that I distinctly remember. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old and I went to my dad and I said, I want this one, because I was really impressed by the artwork in it. It is a stunning book. It's about the legend of King Arthur. Like at the time, it was just the most beautiful books I had ever got my hands on. Like really, really. It is so pretty. So I gave this book to my dad and it was very expensive. This book is like 30 euros. And we were not that rich, but I was like, I want this book. And my dad took it from me, he looked at it, he looked at me and he was like, you're not gonna read this book. And then I said to him, I was like, well, yes, I am gonna read this book. You know, I was trying to convince him. I was like, I'm gonna read this book. I like the legend of King Arthur. I've already read about it. I like this universe. And I know I'm gonna like the book. It's so beautiful. And my dad just showed me the text font. Like, it's not the kind of text font that would make it easy for a kid to read. So he said, like, you know, it's the text font is just like not for kids. You're already struggling to read sometimes. I think you're not gonna like this book and you're not gonna read it. I begged and begged and begged, and I don't know how I convinced him to buy me this book, but he did, because this is probably like the oldest book in my bookshelves, and my dad got it for me. And I remember being so proud of proving him wrong, because I ended up reading the book as a child. I was like 7 years old. As soon as I got this book, as soon as it was mine, I opened it and I read it. Like, I read it in a day. It was for like my first pretty book, and to this day it is one of my favorite books, because, well, it is a cool memory of me and my dad, and also the storytelling is great, and just the drawings in that book are amazing. We're gonna jump a bit in time. When I was in middle school, most of my books were lended to me by a very good friend of mine that read books, most of the time dystopias, and he would just like give me the book afterward and tell me like, hey, I think you'll like this book. So I don't have much books. Like, I didn't buy much books when I was in middle school. And then after middle school, I went to high school, and that is when everything changed for me, because first off, I went to a high school where I was not with my best friend, and my best friend and I grew up really, really close. We were always in the same class. My mom always made sure that we would end up together in the same class, but she went to a different high school and I also went to a different high school, so I didn't have much friends in high school, and also I didn't really feel like socializing, so I was all the time with my music and my headphones and my books, and I was bored out of my mind. I was depressed as fuck. So my first year of high school was fine, like I got by, you know. And then I entered my second year of high school, and that is when things really started to fall apart for me. In France, you have only 3 years of high school, and the first year of high school you do a bit of everything: science, math, literature, languages. And when you get into your second year of high school, you get to pick a specific course. You can choose from 3. It's different now, like, because, well, things change. But when I was in high school, that was how it worked. You could pick from 3 courses. You could either choose science, and you would do a lot of, well, science and math and physics and chemistry, and you would have way less languages, way less literature. You could pick economics, and you would have a bit of everything, but way more economics. And then you could pick literature, and the best thing about this course is that you didn't have math. If you pick literature, you would get books and no math, and that was the best thing ever about the course, because I hated math. I still do. There are just things that I cannot understand for some reason, and I was really bad at math. I have like I have a child level at math. I can't calculate for the life of me. I cannot do it, and I did try to work past it, and it never worked. So I just thought that I was going to pick that course, like I was going to pick literature, so I would get books and no math. You know, I get the best of both worlds. But I was still very depressed and still very, very bored out of my mind, and books literally were my getaway. So that second year of high school, I did not read a single high school book. I did not open a single book that we had to read for school. Not a single one. Which was unusual for me, because I'm a good student mostly, and I do the things that I'm told to do. So whenever and like I like to read, so I don't mind reading books, you know. So whenever I was in class before and we had a book to read, I was one of the first one to finish the damn book because I just like reading and I don't mind reading books that I have to read for school, you know. But that year I just couldn't do it, and I read maybe 3 books a week. And how did I manage to do that? Well, I read during class. I was always with my book in the back of the classroom. Every single class that I had, I was reading a book. I was buying books, like I got so many books that year, and I didn't keep count of how many books I read, but I really should have, because I think it was one of my best reading years. It was like 2017, and I was just like, I just didn't give a damn anymore. I was bored, I was depressed, I just wanted to escape, and I found a way to do that through books. And that is when I came across a very important book in my life, and that book is called, in French, J'ai avalé un arc-en-ciel by Erwan Ji. You could translate this book to like swallowing up the rainbow or something like that. I don't know if that book has ever been translated into English. I'm gonna look. I'm gonna have a look and tell you guys, but it's a pretty easy book if you know French enough that you can read. It's a very cute book. It's a love story and it's pretty easy to read, but you have to have the basics. I'd say you have to have like a B1 level to read this book. But basically it's the story of Capucine, who is half French, half American from the US, because her mom's from the US and her dad is from France. So she speaks fluent French even though she has an accent. And she decides in her last year of high school, after getting out of a really hard relationship, like the relationship itself was fine, but a really hard breakup, she decides to write a blog in French in order to improve her French, and also because she doesn't want her friends to read what she's gonna be writing in that blog, and she doesn't tell her friends that she's writing a blog. But basically she tells about her high school life, her friends, her feelings, and then she meets that girl. And she is gonna have feelings for that girl, and she's very confused because so far she's only liked boys. She's never been attracted to girls before. And it's a very cool coming of age story, and also the most beautiful love story that I've ever read. And when I read this book, I thought to myself, I was like, that might be me. I don't really know how to explain, but what I like most about this book is that the main character is not looking to label herself. It's not like a character realizing at the end that she likes girls and that she's a lesbian, or that she's bisexual, because she's not. She's always been attracted to boys. She's still attracted to boys, but then she has very strong feelings for that one girl. And that book has been very criticized for that. But like, I'm gonna talk about it more in another video because we don't really have time now. But basically, when I read that book, it was like, it felt like it was speaking to me, you know. And in my head, I was like, I don't think I'm ever gonna fall in love with a girl. Don't ask me why, but I could, you know, I definitely could, and I know that I'm not a lesbian, and I know that I'm not bisexual. So this is just about like the spectrum of sexuality, and it's very interesting. So best book that I have read, not in my life, but this book is very dear to me and very important, and I just like love it so much. After that year of boredom and depression, I convinced my mom to let me do a gap year in a foreign country, and I chose to go to India because I wanted to learn English. I was very bad at English, and also I wanted to see different customs, different people. I wanted something that wouldn't remind me of France, you know. I wanted it to be a complete shock, and it worked. I don't know how I convinced my mom to let me do that. It was in 2018. It has been one of the best years of my life because I am the person that I am today because I did that gap year, and because I was in another country for a year, and it changed me for the better. So I didn't do much reading when I was in India because I had so many things to discover, so many things to attend, so many friends to make. So I was not really reading books, but I did try, and I failed because I was drawn to the books that I would be able to read in my mother tongue. but I kind of forgot that I don't have the same level in English as I do in French. And I decided to go back to children's books because kids' books are just the best way to learn a new language. This is my advice. If you want to learn another language through books, you have to pick the easiest books. You have to pick books where you're gonna learn new vocabulary, but also with a sentence pattern that is not too complicated, and children's books do that very well. So the series that I found in India and that I have loved ever since I was a child would be Geronimo Stilton, The Kingdom of Fantasy. For the story, this is another one of the books that I begged and begged my dad to buy me, because in English it's not the same, it's pretty small, but I have the Spanish version that I also bought because I just like it so much. Basically, it smells like this book. If you open it to some pages and scratch the page, you will have a smell, and I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. I read this book in French when I was a kid, but the other books in the series never came out in French, so I never knew the rest of the story. I only had like one other book in the same series in French, and I hadn't liked it so much. But so when I discovered that they had it in India and they had a whole entire series that I had never read, I was so excited. So I read this book that I knew it by heart in French already, so I didn't learn much from this book. But then I read all the other books that I had never gotten to reading in French, and it was amazing because I finally got to know what was happening next and what were the other adventures. And this book really is the reason why I can read books in English now, because it just like it gave me all the tools, all the vocabulary, all the grammar that I needed in order to understand more complex books. And these books live in my heart because they're my favorite bedtime childhood book, and also this book taught me so much, like it really did. And I know it's a kid's book and I was a teenager, so you don't really learn much about life and friendship and love or whatever, but this book is the reason why I can speak and read and write English now. Last anecdote, and also my favorite one. After that year in India, I was kind of lost. I traveled a bit and I lived in Spain for about 5 months because I wanted to learn Spanish. And I did learn Spanish. I need to practice it more, but I do know Spanish enough to read books. And I was going to an event and I needed to take the bus because I was kind of like outside of the city. I lived in Malaga and I needed to take the bus in order to get to the center of the city where like all the shops were and stuff. And I don't remember why I was going there in the first place, but I had decided to stop buying books because I was buying books in Spanish and my luggage just couldn't take it. Like my luggage was overweight and it was like so heavy, and also books cost money and I wanted to use that money for traveling instead of buying books, you know. So I had decided no more books, and I was doing great. I was not buying any more books. I was doing good. I was walking down my street in order to get to my bus stop. I knew the way by heart because I always went to that same bus stop whenever I needed to go wherever I wanted to go. And my street was like a big street, but you had a lot of other little streets on the left and on the right, like smaller streets. And I was just like minding my business, walking in the street, looking around. And then in another really small street, I saw a cat. So I looked at my watch and I was like, you know what? I've got some time to pet the cat. You don't know where I'm going with this, but I know. Listen to the end, it's a really funny story. So I get to the cat, I pet it for about like 5 to 10 minutes. I love cats, and whenever I see a cat in the street, I just have to pet it. So I pet the cat, and then I look at my watch and I'm like, fuck, I'm going to be late. And I do not like being late. I'm always early wherever I go. If I'm not there early, that means I'm not coming. So I really needed to get to the bus stop, and I knew that if I kept going, like if I kept walking in that street, I would get to another street with another bus stop, but I wasn't so sure. So I had two options. I could either go back and take the same way that I had always taken ever since I'd gotten to Spain, or I could just keep on walking and get to the next bus stop, even though I wasn't really sure that there was actually one. I knew that there was one, but I didn't know where it was. But I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna keep walking. So I keep walking, I find the bus stop, and I was waiting for the bus, and I noticed that there was a book sitting in like the bus stop. There was this little book. So I picked it up. It is the ugliest fucking book I have ever seen. This book must be so old. It says Sushi para principiantes, which you could translate to sushi for beginners. And I just like picked the book up and I looked around to see if there was like anybody that could have like maybe forgotten the book or something, but there was no one. So I opened the book and there was a little note inside, and the note says, "Do you like sushi? If you haven't tried it, I really recommend it. I hope you enjoy reading this book and giving it a second life. Tell me what you thought about it on my Instagram." And she, like the girl wrote her Instagram and then she says like, "Thank you." So I kept the book because that is such like a funny story. And also I think it's funny because I had decided not to buy more books, but God just like put a book my way, and it's just like, I just love that story. And now whenever people ask me about Spain, I just tell them about that particular story, even though it has nothing to do with Spain or whatever I did there, but it's just like the best story ever. Like, I decide that I'm not going to buy more books and that I'm going on a book buying ban, and then I just like find a random book in a random bus stop. I think that's just so cool. Anyways, those are my bookish anecdotes. I hope you enjoyed the video. I know that I really liked making it. Next week we're gonna pick my winter TBR because I am done with my fall TBR. I'll tell you more about that when the time comes. Well, I hope you enjoyed and I'll see you later.